Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello, and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 21, and today we are going to be discussing the deleted scenes from Dead Man's Chest, which is the second movie in the Pirates franchise. Of course, last episode we talked about and discussed the Curse of the Black Pearl deleted scenes, so only fitting to continue the trilogy's deleted scene episodes with this Dead Man's Chest one. There's a lot of really cool deleted scenes in Dead Man's Chest, so I'm actually really excited to talk about these. Some of them I've mentioned on the Dead Man's Chest episodes if you listen to those. But today we're going to be going through all 20 of the Dead Man's Chest deleted scenes in full, discussing whether or not they should have been in the film or if they were better left deleted. So let's get right into the first deleted scene. So the first deleted scene from Dead Man's Chest is titled Steady as She Goes. And this takes place close to the beginning of the film. This is after we get introduced to the Black Pearl, Jack is back, all that kind of things. And this starts when he's in his captain's cabin, looking at the compass, and of course the compass isn't pointing anywhere, it's all messed up. And Jack reaches for his bottle of rum and he finds that it's empty. So of course this whole part is in the movie, and then Jack of course says, "Why is the rum always gone?" So he gets up and of course gets his hat and his coat and goes out on deck, just like in the movie. But in this deleted scene we see character on the helm looks down to Jack, and it's actually raining in this deleted scene, which is weird because when Jack actually comes back up in the movie it is not raining, so very interesting as well. But the helmsman says, "Do we have a heading, Captain?" And Jack just says, "Steady as she goes," and then he goes and walks below deck, and of course he says, "As you were, gents," and then he continues to go down below deck until we get to where all the cargo is, and he continues to walk, and he gets scared and he pulls his pistol out, but he finds that it's just a chicken, and then Jack's like, "I thought so." Then he finally makes his way to the cellar, he unlocks the door, goes in just like the movie, and in this deleted scene we get a little bit more extra just footage in here of Jack going through the different barrels and knocking on them to see if they're full or not. But he continues walking until he gets over to the wall with all the rum bottles, but of course it's all empty. And then of course it's when he sees the barnacles in the one slot, just like in the film, and the movie would progress as normal. So this one, of course, it doesn't really add anything crazy to the movie. It's mainly just extra footage. We had some of these scenes in Curse of the Black Pearl. Some of the deleted scenes were literally just extra footage, expanding extra scenes. These ones aren't really needed, and I'm fine with this one not being in the film. So we then go over to the second deleted scene from Dead Man's Chest, which is called East of India. And this one's pretty interesting because it takes place after Will is arrested and when Will is brought into Beckett's office. So Will is brought in, and of course the officer says, "Lord Beckett, the prisoner as ordered," and then Beckett says, "Those won't be necessary." And the officer takes off the shackles on Will, and this is where the deleted scene actually starts. So when the officer's unlocking the chains on Will, Will asks Beckett, "You intend to release Elizabeth as well?" And Beckett says, "That's entirely up to you." And then Will's like, "Really? Then I'll pop out and tell the guards to let her go." Then Beckett rephrases his statement and says, clarifying, "That's entirely dependent on you." And then just like in the movie, we have the line, "The East India Trading Company has need of your services." And then Will says, what is the East India Trading Company doing in the Caribbean?" And Beckett says, "Well, we are east of India, just a long way around. After all, when goods don't cross borders, then armies will." And that is the end of the second deleted scene. I actually like that one a lot. It's only a few lines of dialogue that were really omitted from the movie, but I do like more of that exchange. I like when Beckett's like, yeah, it's entirely up to you, and Will's like, okay, I'll just go freer right now. Like, I find it funny, and I also like Beckett's dialogue at the end of the scene. Well, we are east of India, just a long way around. I do like that a lot. So I do like that one. I sort of wish it was in the film. It's just a few extra lines, but unfortunately it was cut. So we go over to the third deleted scene here, which is called Elizabeth Gets Her Gun, and this takes place right after Governor Swan goes and frees Elizabeth from jail, and this is when she and her father are going into that carriage. So, of course, just like in the movie, Governor Swan says, even if Will succeeds, do not ask me to endure the sight of my daughter walking to the gallows. Do not. Then Elizabeth gets in the carriage, and Governor Swan hands her a pistol, and he says, here, take this. And she takes it from him, and Elizabeth says, but what about you? And Governor Swan says, there are still men loyal to me here, and Beckett is wary of my ties to the crown. Perhaps I can ensure a fair trial for Will if he returns. And then Elizabeth, like in the movie, says, a fair trial for Will ends in a hanging. And then Governor Swan says, well, then there is nothing left for you here. The movie continues as normal. The carriage heads for the harbor, and that's the end of that deleted scene. So I like that one just because it gives us the quick exposure of finding out how Elizabeth actually got the pistol that we see her with in the next scene. That's really it for that one, but I do like that one just because of that little moment. So next up we have the fourth deleted scene, and this one is called What of You and Jack? And this actually is an extended part of one of my favorite scenes from Dead Man's Chest, which is when Elizabeth goes and talks to Beckett with the pistol and everything. I love the scene, but this is an extended part of this scene, which I like a lot. So, just like in the movie, Elizabeth says, considering to your calculations that you robbed me of my wedding night. And she makes him, of course, sign the letters of marque, and Beckett, of course, says, so I did. A marriage interrupted, or fate intervenes. And then, just like in the movie, Beckett says, you're making great efforts to ensure Jack Sparrow's freedom. And Elizabeth says, these aren't going to Jack. And then Beckett says, oh, really? To ensure Mr. Turner's freedom, then. But what of you and Jack? And what of me? I'll still want that compass. Consider that in your calculations. And just like in the movie, Elizabeth runs away. She runs out the side door, and Beckett goes to follow her. And then he finds out there's this one guard who is just asleep on the chair next to him, and he just looks at the guy and kicks over his chair. And that is the end of that deleted scene. This one's kind of cool just because it adds a bit of extra dialogue to this scene. Is it really needed? No. I do also like the gag at the end there with the guard who is asleep. Overall, not a bad deleted scene. I do like it, but the movie can live on without these extra lines. So we go to the next deleted scene, the fifth deleted scene, which is called Nevermind. This one takes place once we arrive at the Isle of the Pelagostos, and Jack, of course, is the chief. And this starts off with what's in the movie, with the Pelagostos putting the necklace of toes around Jack's neck, and he says, thank you. And then, of course, he goes to bite the toe, like in the movie, which is still disgusting. But after he spits out, the little bit of toe that he was eating, he turns to the Pelagosto on his right, and he says, I noticed that you got loads of women everywhere, but very few children. Why is that? Are the little ones a bit more tasty then? And after Jack asks that, the Pelagosto turns and looks at him, and Jack kind of just awkwardly looks back away. Then we go back over to the bone cages, where everyone, of course, they're trying to find a way to, of course, get out of the bone cages. And the rival Bone Cage, as I'll call them, the people who die, they say, Gibbs, we've got a plan. And then Gibbs is like, what is it? And then they're like, never mind. And then Gibbs is like, oh, Will, you never should have come here. So deleted scene number 6 is called 6 Became 5. This is also another scene on the Isle of the Pelagostos. So this is after everyone has escaped the gorge, and now they're rolling the bone cage, and they fall down into the cavern, and of course the bone cage splits, and they all try to swim out. So we have some extra footage here of everyone actually breaking the bone cage open and escaping. And just like in the movie, it progresses pretty much as normal. They all get to the side of the rocks. And this is actually a really cool moment. I like this. Everyone starts celebrating that they escaped. And Gibbs and Cotton and Will are all laughing and everything. And then out of nowhere, a dart gets shot and kills one of the pirates in their group. They look up and they see the Pelagostos have found them, and just like in the movie, they start shooting arrows down to them. And that is the end of that one. I do like this, just because it adds a bit more. I like them celebrating, but also not one that really is needed. The pirate who dies in this is a pirate that literally is on screen for 2 minutes. So it is a cool one. I like the extra footage for this scene. But I do think that this one kind of kills the momentum of this whole action scene, because there's so much going on, and this whole action scene in the movie is so high octane. There's you cut back to Jack, you cut back to the crew, and you just keep cutting back, and there's so much stuff going on that I feel like this quick moment would have kind of just cut the excitement around this scene, around this whole action scene. Then we go up to the next deleted scene, which is called Cutlery, and this one takes place after Jack is falling down the gorge. So the bamboo stick is now stuck between the two sides of the gorge, and he's just hanging there. And this deleted scene is kind of fun. Jack climbs back up to the bamboo with the knife in his mouth. And then when the bamboo stick kind of gives way on the one side, the knife drops out of his mouth. And then, just like normal, the bamboo stick breaks free, and Jack goes plummeting down, goes through not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, 5 bridges before he hits the ground. And of course the bamboo stick slams into the ground right next to him, and Jack springs up like nothing's happened and starts running away. But he forgets that his foot is still tied to the stick. So once he gets a certain distance, he flies down on the ground, and he notices right in front of him the knife that he dropped earlier is right there, and he grabs it, cuts himself free, and that is the end of that deleted scene. I like this one just because it has a little bit more humor for this scene, but once again, it's not one that's really needed. Just a little bit extra, but not a bad one overall. So we go to deleted scene number 8, which is called Where's My Prophet? This takes place right after everyone escapes the Isle of Pelagostos, and Will goes up to Jack and he says, Jack, Elizabeth is in danger. And then Jack says, have you considered keeping a more watchful eye on her? Just lock her up somewhere. And then Will says, she is locked up in a prison, bound to hang for helping you. And Jack says, there comes a time where one must take responsibilities for one's mistakes. And Jack grabs the one pirate's sword, just like in the movie. So far, the scene has progressed as normal. And once again, like in the movie, Will says, I need that compass of yours, Jack. I must trade it for my freedom. And this is where we start to get into deleted scene territory. So Jack says, so, you get the compass. You rescue your bunny lass yet again. Where's my prophet? And then Will says, I will deliver to you the letters of marque. You will be granted a full pardon, commissioned as a privateer in service to England. And Jack ponders this for a second, and then he says, accepting those things is what you want me to do for you. Agreed. But what will you do for me? And then Will just says, anything. Which is probably the worst thing for Will to say in this situation. And Jack says, Mr. Gibbs. And Gibbs says, Captain. And then Jack says, we have a need to travel upriver. And then, of course, the movie continues as normal. I do like this one just because it's another extra added exchange between Jack and Will. I like the whole where's my profit thing, and those are all things you want me to do for you, but what will you do for me? And I do like that a lot. So I would have liked to see this one, at least just that extra exchange in the movie, but of course nothing really substantial. So then we head over to deleted scene number 9, which is called Tortuga. This takes place on the Edinburgh Trader, specifically in the part where Bellamy and the crew, they notice that the ghost dress is flying around the ship. So of course Elizabeth is up in the crow's nest, controlling the dress, but they all think it's haunted, and they see the dress flying around the deck. And the helmsman's like, tell me you see that. And then Bellamy's like, I do see that. And the dress points to Bellamy like it does in the movie. And then, of course, it points out to the sea in the movie as well. And then the one crewmate's like, she wants you to do something. And then Bellamy says, she's trying to give a sign. This is pretty cool. So when the dress flies away, you just hear in the distance, Tortuga, which is Elizabeth saying it from the crow's nest. But the one crewmate's like, Bermuda? And the other guy's like, Tobago? Tortilla? And the guy who says tortilla, everyone else looks at him. And then he's like, sorry, I'm hungry. And then Elizabeth ends up getting frustrated, and the movie would then progress as normal. But another one that like isn't really needed, but it is kind of funny. But yeah, we go over to deleted scene number 10 now, which is called If You Believe Such Things. This is a continuation of the upriver scene. So just like in the movie, we have that shot of the Black Pearl and the crew going upriver to go see Tia Dalma. But in this scene, we have a nice, really extended version of this scene. So we get to see shots of right when the boats come in, like right when they're leaving shore, going into the jungle here. And then we go over to Will, and then Will says, what is it that has Jack spooked? Which is, of course, a line that isn't in the movie, but it actually was in the trailer for Dead Man's Chest, if you remember that. Then Gibbs responds and says, Jack has run afoul of none other than Davy Jones himself. Thinks he's only safe on dry land. If he goes out to open water, he'll be taken. And then Will's like, taken. And Gibbs is like, aye. And then Will's like, taken. And then Gibbs is like, aye. And then Will's like, by Davy Jones. I love how Will's like not believing any of this. And Gibbs is like, well, I'll tell you. If you do believe such things, there's a beast that does the bidding of Davy Jones. A fearful creature with giant tentacles that'll suction your face clean off. And drag an entire ship down to the crushing darkness. The Kraken. Then, of course, we have that moment where everyone looks at each other. Marty, Pinto, and Rigetti, they all look at each other. And Gibbs continues with the stuff that is in the movie and says, they say the stench of its breath is like, ugh. Imagine, the last thing you know on God's green earth is the roar of the Kraken and the reeking odor of 1,000 rotting corpses. And then Gibbs is like, if you believe such things. And then Will says, never thought Jack the type to be afraid of dying. And then Gibbs says, aye, but with Jones, it ain't about the dying. It's about the punishment. Think about the worst fate you can conjure for yourself, stretching on and on forever. Well, that's what awaits you in Davy Jones' locker. And Will says, and the key can save him from that? And then Gibbs says, well, that's the very question Jack once answered. Bad enough, even, to go visit her. And then Will's like, her. And then Gibbs is like, I. And that is the end of deleted scene number 10. And I really like that one a lot, because a lot of it is stuff in the movie, and there only has a few exchanges that were really deleted, if you think about it. But the stuff that is deleted is really, really good. I love, when Will's like, I never thought Jack would be afraid of dying. And then Gibbs is like, it ain't about the dying, it's about the punishment. And it really reinforces the fact that is why Jack is afraid. It's not because Jack is scared to die. It's because Jack is scared of the punishment that will await him if he doesn't, pay up, or if he gets caught. And of course, Gibbs actually says a line that Tiadama actually says in At World's End, and he says, think about the worst thing you could conjure up for yourself, stretching on and on forever. That's what awaits us in Davy Jones' locker, which is pretty much what Tiadama says, except for a few different words. But that really establishes the whole Davy Jones' locker concept earlier than At World's End. And that's kind of why I like this a lot, is it kind of sets the groundwork for stuff that happens in At World's End. So that's why I kind of like this one, and I kind of wish it would have been in the film. But also, I wonder if it's also another meaning in this, because when Gibbs says, think about the worst thing you could conjure up for yourself, stretching on and on forever. And we know from At World's End, the Davy Jones' locker is, pretty much a complete stretch of land, and there also is, the bit of sea there, but there's that whole stretch of just dry land. And I wonder if it's a personal fate for you, because we didn't see anybody else in Davy Jones' locker, which is interesting. Except, if you play the At World's End game, there actually is a level in Davy Jones' locker where you actually run into somebody else in Davy Jones' locker. We'll get to that when we cover that. But I wonder if, the punishment of Davy Jones' locker is personal for the one specific person, which is why we never saw anybody else in the locker besides Jack, which will also kind of personalize the torment of being, land stretching on forever and the Black Pearl being stuck on dry land forever. That probably being the worst fate Jack could imagine for himself. And that's why the Davy Jones' locker we see is what it is, because it's a personal torment for Jack specifically, which I don't know if that was really the purpose of Davy Jones' locker, or if that's kind of a thing that I'm just making up from this one line of dialogue from Gibbs, but it is a really interesting interpretation, and I would like to actually have clarification on that maybe at some point. It'll never happen, but that is something interesting to think about, is what if Davy Jones' locker is personal for each person? It's not just land stretching on forever for every single person in the locker, or if it's a personal torment for each individual person. So that's something interesting to think about. But overall, I really like that scene. So we go over to deleted scene number 11, which is called Begin to Forget. And this actually takes place after Will arrives on the Flying Dutchman, and after Will has gotten the lashes from Bootstrap. So Bootstrap goes over to console his son, and then Will's like, I don't need your help. And Bootstrap comes over and says, the bosun prides himself in cleaving flesh from bone with every swing. And then Will says, so I'm to understand what you do as an act of compassion. And then Bootstrap just says, yes. And then, of course, now we go into deleted scene territory, and Will just says, then I guess I am my father's son. Which kind of recoils Bootstrap in a way that we don't really see. And Will says, for nearly a year now, I've been telling myself I killed you to save you. And then Bootstrap says, you killed me. And then Will says, I lifted the curse you were under, knowing it would mean your death. But at least you would no longer suffer the fate handed to you by Barbossa. And Bootstrap's like, who? Who's Barbossa? And then Will turns around, and Will's like, Barbossa, the man who condemned you to a life at the bottom of the ocean. And then Bootstrap is like, those who've done things to you, you tend to forget. But it's the things you've done to others, those are things that hang on. And Bootstrap continues to walk away, and he says, it's the gift and the lie given by Jones. You make the deal, join the crew, you think you're cheating the powers. But it's not reprobation you found. It's oblivion. You begin to forget. Losing who you were bit by bit, till you end up like poor Wyvern here. And then, of course, the movie progresses as normal, where we see Wyvern and that whole exchange. But this one I love so much, because it's another scene where Will gets to really interact with Bootstrap in a way we don't get to see in the movie, especially right after they meet for the first time, you know. The line where Will's like, then I guess I really am my father's son. It really hits you hard for some reason. And we also get that lore about, you know, what Will was feeling when he actually broke the curse, which, you know, is never talked about or expanded upon in Curse of Black Pearl. Because you don't think about it at the time, because we really didn't know Bootstrap or who he was. But, like, that whole time the curse was still ongoing, Bootstrap was still alive, you know? Like, he was still alive at the bottom of the ocean, just chilling there, not able to die. And then when Will actually broke the curse, then that is when Bootstrap was then dying, and that's when the deal with Davy Jones was made. That's when he was picked up by Jones, and that's when he made the deal. So it really, like, I love this a lot because it has a lot of explanation about how Will was feeling after he broke the curse. Will literally thought that he killed his father. You know, it's something, this is a really cool thing, was we don't get to see Will's, like, inner emotions and his kind of way of thinking a lot. I mean, we do see it many times, a lot more in At World's End, I feel, but, like, this is one of those moments where, especially at the start of Will's journey here, or I guess in the middle of his journey, I should say, you know, we don't really get to see, you know, this torment that Will has carried for a year now, after, you know, it's been a year between Curse and Dead Man's Chest. But that's what I really like about this, is it really expands that, and right when they first meet each other, it really just expands their relationship. And that's not even counting the fact, you know, after Will says Barbossa, and Bootstrap's like, who's Barbossa? And that, like, that also just hits so hard, because it's one of those things that, you know, of course, people being under curses on ghost ships is not a real thing in the world, but, like, when you really think about it, it really is an allegory for, like, Alzheimer's, which really makes it hit even harder, because, and also the line from Bootstrap says, you know, the people who have hurt you, you don't remember, but it's the hurt that you've done to others that you remember, which is also probably one of the best Bootstrap Bill lines in the franchise. But yeah, this deleted scene is really, really good. I love it a lot. I really wish this one was in the movie. It really expands Will and Bootstrap's relationship, especially at the start here. But yeah, overall, 10 out of 10. Should have been in the movie. But yeah, we're going to continue on to deleted scene number 12, which is called Manual Labor. And this one's a pretty fun one as well. So this starts off right after the Black Pearl leaves Tortuga with Elizabeth and James Norrington. So we see Norrington is working on the deck with the rest of the crew. And the funny thing is here that he's using his wig as a sponge to swab the deck, which I find really funny. And Jack walks over and steps right up to Norrington and puts his boot right in front of Norrington. And Norrington looks up, and Jack says, "A bit of manual labor is good for you, former Commodore." builds character. And Jack does not move, and he kind of just stomps his foot a little bit. And Norrington takes his wig and cleans Jack's boot. And then Jack ends up walking away. I do like that little exchange. Also just seeing Norrington, he's at such a lowly position at this point in his life. But yeah, like it's really cool to see, or not really cool, but it kind of sucks to see him at such a low point. But like, yeah, it's one of those things that it's another cool Norrington moment that wasn't in the movies. If you listen to the last episode, I talked a lot about James Norrington, and like how most of his good scenes were cut from the movies. This isn't one of his best scenes, but it is a quick little scene that really shows how Norrington feels at this point in his life. He's literally reduced to a deckhand on a ship. He used to be a Commodore in the Navy, and now he's just a deckhand, literally swabbing the deck and cleaning Jack's boots. And it really shows, how far he has fallen so far. But we continue the scene, and Jack walks over to Elizabeth, who is currently reading the letters of Mark. And he grabs the letters from Elizabeth, and Jack says, "These letters of Mark are meant to go to me, are they not?" And then as Jack looks at them, he sees the signature at the bottom, and he says, "Beckett." And then Gibbs says, "Beckett?" And then Elizabeth's like, "Yes, they're signed. Lord Cutler Beckett of the East India Trading Company." And then, of course, just like in the movie, Jack does the "blah" with his tongue. And then Gibbs is like, "Will was working for Beckett all along." And, of course, that's when the deleted scene ends. But I do like this a lot because this is when Jack notices that Beckett is back in the game. And, at this point, Elizabeth does not know really anything about Beckett. She doesn't know, the history between Jack and Beckett or anything like that. So that's why she doesn't really think twice when Jack's like Beckett, and then Gibbs is like Beckett. So, yeah, a very cool scene. Two little pieces that are really good. One good piece for Norrington, and then the other piece there for, Jack noticing that Beckett is back in action. But we move over to deleted scene number 13, and this is probably one of the most infamous deleted scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean history, because this is the extended Liar's Dice game. This is the whole 5-minute long Liar's Dice scene. And I say infamous because this is probably the thing that people talk about the most when they talk about deleted scenes for Pirates of the Caribbean, because this is the longest deleted scene. It is the most influential deleted scene. It is something that should have been in the movie and was not in the movie. Of course, we do have Liar's Dice in the movie, but it's not to this extent. It's not completely fleshed out. And this is what I'm actually very excited to cover, because there's a lot of great dialogue between Will Turner, between Davy Jones, and Bootstrap, and this is probably one of, if not the best, deleted scene in Pirates of the Caribbean history. So let's get through it. So the deleted scene starts after Will says, "I challenge Davy Jones," and Davy Jones comes down and he says, "I accept then." And the table is brought down. Will sits down as well as Jones, and the crew places the cups and the dice on the table. Will picks up one of the dice to look at it, and then he looks up at Jones and he says, "I wager everything I own." And Jones comes over and says, "I only bet on what's dearest to a man's heart. Else there's no way to tell if he's bluffing. What a man is willing to risk or not to risk, that's a measure of his soul." This really cool thing that Jones is doing as he says this, because his little tentacle on his right hand kind of has the dice suctioned to it, so they're kind of just like rolling by on his tentacle. It's really cool. But also something I'll say before we really get into this is that the CGI is completely done in this scene. Like this is probably the only deleted scene with Davy Jones that has the CGI completely finished. There's some Davy Jones deleted scenes in At World's End, one that I love a lot, and the CGI wasn't done for that one. It's just Bill Nye in his mocap suit. But it still feels like Davy Jones, CGI or not. But this is the only one that actually has the CGI completely done, completely finished. And that really shows that this was about to be in the movie, but it was cut out like last minute. It really, it annoys me because this is such a good scene, and you don't get the impact of this scene unless you see the full thing, the full 2 games. And I forget where I saw it, but Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, of course, the writers of Pirates of the Caribbean, they were pretty sad that they lost this whole scene. They ended up having to cut it down to that one game just because it was too long, apparently. So, unfortunately, even they miss it. But let's get back into it. So right after Jones says this, Will thinks about what he's going to wager again, and then he says, "I wager 100 years of service." And Bootstrap says, "No." And then Davy Jones says, "Against your freedom." And Will just says, "Against my father's freedom." And Jones looks over to Bootstrap and he smiles and he turns back, and then Jones says, "Agreed." Because now he knows that Will is actually betting with something that actually means something. At first when Will's like, "I wager everything I own," Davy Jones is like, "That doesn't mean anything, my guy. Like, actually bet something." And now that he's bet something that actually means something to him, now Jones is ready to duel. And even though this is at its heart, it really is just them playing a dice game, there is so much story that comes out of just these games. Like the banter that we're going to have with Will and Davy Jones in just a second is really what elevates this. It's so much more than them just playing liar's dice. So after they shake up the cups, they put them down, and Will takes a first look at his dice. And Will says 2 3s. And Jones just laughs and says, "You're a desperate man. What is the cause? It can only be a woman." And then Jones takes a look at his dice, and he makes the bet 3 3s. And then we go back over to Will, and Will says, "A woman need not cause you to be desperate if you choose the right woman." And I wonder if that kind of got under Jones's skin a little bit. But Will makes his next bet and says 4 3s. And then Jones says, "I remember now. You're the one that hopes to get married. But your fate is to be married to this ship." And then Will just says, "I choose my own fate." And then Davy Jones says, "Then it wouldn't be fate then, would it?" And then Jones makes his next bet, and he says 5 3s. And then Will takes another look at his dice. We're revealing all of his dice here. He has 4 6s and a 3. And Will makes his next bet, which is the one that ultimately will win the game. And Will says 5 6s. And Jones laughs and calls him a liar. But Will opens up his cup, so does Jones, and then everyone gets to reveal that there actually are 5 6s on the board. And we now have the triumph of Will over Davy Jones, which is crazy that he literally beat Davy Jones on his first game. But Jones just says, "Well done, Master Turner." And Davy Jones stands up to go, and Bootstrap goes up to him, and Bootstrap says, "I'm free, Jones." And Jones just continues to walk away. But before Bootstrap can get happy that he's free, Will says, "Another game." And then the smile goes away off of Bootstrap's face. And Davy Jones just says, "You can't best the devil twice, son." And then Will has this great line, and he says, "Then why are you walking away?" I love that line so much. And then Jones turns back around, walks back over to Will. And this is where we really get the game that is in the movie. So that whole game we just went through was the game that is completely deleted, not in the movie. Now we're starting to get into the territory of the game in the film. So just like in the movie, Davy Jones says, "The stakes," and Will says, "My soul, an eternity of servitude." And then Jones says, "Against." And then Will says, "What was it you said about that which is dearest to a man's heart? I want this." And he takes out and throws the drawing of the key on the board, and Jones picks it up and sees the key, and he recoils and says, "How do you know of the key?" And then Will just says, "That isn't part of the game, is it? You can still walk away." But Jones doesn't relent, and he just sits down, ready to play another game of Liar's Dice. And he pulls out the key to show to Will, as well as the rest of the crew. And now Will knows, of course, where the key is hidden. And right before Jones and Will are about to start, that's when we, of course, see Bootstrap come down as well to join the game. And Jones says, "What's this?" And Bootstrap says, "I'm in," matching his wager. And, of course, that is when the movie continues as normal. So that ends the deleted part of this scene. This is so great on so many levels. Of course, I talked about part of it as we went through it, but especially at the end here, I mean, Bootstrap was literally free from that first game. But the reason that he isn't free in the movie is because he comes back in and does another wager for an eternity of servitude. And as we know in the movie, Bootstrap is the one who loses the game. So once again, that means he is not free. So it is really cool. This whole scene is fantastic because there's so much good dialogue being thrown around by Will and Davy Jones in this scene. It just doesn't end. It's fantastic. This is probably got to be my favorite deleted scene in Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, like, there's so much good stuff going on. The dialogue between Davy Jones and Will is literally outstanding. And I am just so sad that they cut the rest of this out of the movie. Like, if you still look at the game in the movie is still really good. You know, you still have some good character moments, but this has so much good dialogue and so much good character that is built in this singular 5-minute dice game that I really wish was actually in the movie. So unfortunately this was cut, but this is the one above all should have been in the movie. And the CGI is literally done in this scene too. So literally make an extended version of Dead Man's Chest. You only have to include this scene because the CGI is done. Like, it's fine. Just put it in the movie. But anyway, we're going to go over to deleted scene number 14, which is called Punishment. And this one takes place after Jones realizes Will has stolen the key, and this takes place right before the Kraken attack on the Edinburgh Trader. So Davy Jones says Jack Sparrow's reprieve is ended, and he turns around to Bootstrap, and Davy Jones says, "Your son was fortunate enough to find a ship, but not so fortunate as to find land." And the whole crew starts laughing. And this scene, you can actually see the CGI is not finished on the crew. It's finished on Jones, but the crew, it actually is not completely finished. But Bootstrap's like, "Oh, please. Will shouldn't be punished on the account of Jack Sparrow. It's Jack you want." And Jones says, "What makes you believe it's your son that's being punished here?" And then Davy Jones nods to Macus, and then Bootstrap realizes what's about to happen. And then, of course, we get the no from Bootstrap that's actually in the movie. But it's earlier on. It's actually before the Kraken Hammer actually gets slammed. But like in the movie, we have Davy Jones going up to Bootstrap and putting his claw around his neck, and he says, "You will watch this." And then, of course, we have the whole thing with the Kraken hammer. It said, "Let no joyful voice be heard. Let no man look up at the sky with hope. And let this day be cursed by we who ready to wake the Kraken." The Kraken hammer slams, and then, of course, alerts the Kraken. And that's the end of that deleted scene. This one is cool just because it's another moment between Davy Jones and Bootstrap. Other than that, it's not one that's really needed in the film. But I do like that realization that Bootstrap has that they're going to unleash the Kraken there. And yeah, a pretty good one. One that is needed in the film, probably not, but still a pretty good scene. So then we go over to deleted scene number 15, and this is called "Every Man for Himself." And this takes place during the Kraken attack on the Edinburgh Trader. So the Kraken snaps the mast that Will is on, and it kind of goes into the ocean. Will jumps off, and this is after the whole Kraken attack. Will sees the body of the Kraken under the water, and then he goes up and gets on that piece of driftwood. And once Will gets on this piece of driftwood, he sees a boat with a few crew members from the Edinburgh Trader that are trying to get away. And Will's like, "Hey, over here!" trying to get their attention. And then the guy in the boat's like, "Sorry, mate, it's every man for himself." And then, out of nowhere, one of the Kraken's tentacles comes up and smashes the boat. And, yeah, all those guys are dead. So, Will then, once again, is stuck on this piece of driftwood. And just like in the movie, the Flying Dutchman comes up behind him, and he goes back into the water. And that's the end of that deleted scene. So this one's a fun little moment. Is it one needed in the movie? No. It is kind of funny. In a evil way, but yeah, it's a pretty good one. Not needed in the movie though. But the next one we have up is deleted scene number 16, and this is one that I really, really, really like. This is another one of my favorites in Pirates of the Caribbean in general. This one's called "Salvation," and this one takes place right after the Black Pearl. Jack, Elizabeth, and Norrington, as well as Pintel and Rigetti, they all arrive on Isla Cruces. So it starts in the boat with, Pintel and Rigetti arguing about how to pronounce Kraken. And Pintel's like, "I've always heard it said Kraken." And Rigetti's like, "What, with a long A?" And then Pintel's like, "Ah." And then Rigetti's like, No. Kraken's how it's pronounced in the original Scandinavian, and Kraken's closer to that." And then Pintel's like, "Well, we ain't original Scandinavians, are we? Kraken." And Rigetti's like, "It's a mythological creature. I can call it what I want." Then we arrive at Isla Cruces, and Jack says the iconic, "Guard the boat, mind the tide, don't touch my dirt." And Pintel and Rigetti observe them all leaving, and Rigetti says, "And you was wrong about tomato, if I recall." And then Pintel just says, "I like tomatoes." It's, and that isn't even the deleted scene. That's literally just the precursor to the actual good part of this scene. But, I love them so much. So good. But now we get to the actual meat of this deleted scene, which is the part I actually like a lot. And this is actually the backstory of Isla Cruces. So as Jack, Elizabeth, and Norrington walk along the beach on Isla Cruces, Norrington goes up to Elizabeth and says, "I didn't expect anybody to be here." And Elizabeth looks at what Norrington's looking at, and he sees the old church on the hill, the church that we're going to get to in the sword fight. But Elizabeth says, "There's not." And then Norrington says, "You know this place." And then Elizabeth says, "Stories. Isla Cruces. The church came to the island and brought salvation and disease. and death. They say the priest had to bury everybody one by one. He went mad and hung himself. And then Norrington says, one of my favorite Norrington lines, and he says, better mad with the rest of the world than sane alone. And then they're interrupted by Jack walking over and saying, no fraternizing with the help, love. And he motions Elizabeth to keep moving. And then Norrington's like, oh, after you, sir. And Jack just gives Norrington his shovel and continues to walk away. But I love this one because it has that backstory for Ela Cruces. You know, why was that church there in the first place? Why is there so many graves? It gives us all that backstory in just like a 30-second scene. So I really wish that was in the scene. And before we really go into this in more depth, we're actually going to go to deleted scene number 17, which actually sort of continues this. It's called For Whom the Bell Tolls. And this actually takes place during the sword fight as Jack and Norrington are fighting up through the bell tower in the church. And as they go up, we actually see the hanging corpse of the dead priest. And that's literally all this deleted scene is. So, of course, since the first part was cut, they cut this part as well because, you know, why would there be a hanging body in there if there was no story about it? But I like this whole story a lot, and I'm really mad it was cut from the movie because it gives us all of this backstory that we need to know what Ela Cruces is, why no one goes to Ela Cruces, and why it's the perfect place for Davy Jones to keep the heart there. No one comes to this island because it's bad. It's a bad omen. You know, it's completely cursed with disease and death, as Elizabeth said. You know, and the priest went mad and hung himself because he literally had to bury everybody. But it gives a lot of information, and I really wonder if this was one of the main reasons that Davy Jones actually picked Ela Cruces to store the dead man's chest on, because no one would ever come here, you know, normally. You know, you wouldn't just have some random person on your crew, hey, let's go to Ela Cruces today. No one's coming here, which makes it the perfect place to store a chest that you don't want anybody to find. So overall, really good. I wish these were in the movie just so we get that that explanation about the history of Ela Cruces. I love it a lot, and the implications are really great. So then we go over to deleted scene number 18, which is called Pot Kettle Black. This takes place during the three-way sword fight, or actually at the beginning of the three-way sword fight. So as Jack says in the movie, the dark side of ambition. And Norrington says, oh, I prefer to see it as the promise of redemption. Then he goes and the sword fight begins. And as Will, Norrington, and Jack fight, you have Elizabeth, of course, in the background trying to get them to stop. And we have a quick truce between them, which this is actually the deleted part of this scene. And Jack is talking to Will and says, we cannot let him get the chest. Trust me on this. And then Norrington gives him this look. But Jack keeps talking to Will and he says, you can mistrust me less than you can mistrust him. Trust me. And then Jack gets confused by what he said. But Norrington then says something to Will, and he says he just wants Elizabeth for himself. And then Jack says something to Norrington, and he says, pot, kettle, black. And then the sword fight continues once again like normal. Jack grabs the key, and they continue to run up the beach. Norrington knocks Will over, and then Elizabeth runs over to him, and Will just says, guard the chest. And Elizabeth just says, no. And that's the end of that deleted scene. I like that a lot because it has more of the intentions of why everyone wants to kill each other. Also, I love the line where Jack's like, you can mistrust me more than you can mistrust him. Trust me. And then Jack confuses himself, which is funny because, you know, Jack says all these things that no one understands, but it's only a few times where he actually confuses himself with what he's saying. So I find that pretty funny. Then we go over to the second to last deleted scene, which is called 3 swords, 1 key. And this is the extended part of the 3-way sword fight. So this takes place right after Elizabeth has her tantrum, and Pinto and Ragetti start running away with the dead man's chest. And of course she goes to chase after them. Then we go back to Will, Norrington, and Jack, and we get these really cool shots that aren't in the movie of them fighting. These really nice, great landscape shots that show a lot more of the location that they're shooting on while they're running up. We got these really great moving shots that are zoomed out, so we see all this beautiful exumas that we don't get to see in the movie, because they shot this, at the exumas in the Caribbean, which was a really hard place to shoot because half of the day it would literally be underwater because the tide would come in and completely cover it up. But in these quick shots there, we get these really beautiful zoomed out shots that literally do a 360 around them, and we see all the exumas around it, and it's a really, really good scene, a really good shot, just because we see all this beautiful landscape, the beautiful crystalline blue water, and it's beautiful. It's great. We keep going with some more footage of them fighting, and this is mainly just extra footage of the fight. It's really nothing else, no more dialogue really, but we just have these beautiful zoomed out shots throughout this extended fight. Will knocks down Norrington and literally runs over Norrington, like literally steps on his back and runs over him. It's funny. And we just have, it's really just the continued sword fight. It's just a full-on cut part of the sword fight with some beautiful zoomed out shots of the location they're shooting on. And there's this really great part where Norrington has the key stuck on his sword, and then all 3 of them put their swords together, so the key is kind of trapped between all 3 of their swords. They kind of all just walk around in a circle. They're all just waiting to see who's going to release first, kind of like a Wild West duel, which is pretty cool. But we have this whole moment of them all waiting to see who's going to release first. And Jack does a typical Jack Sparrow move, and he looks out into the distance and squints, which makes Will and Norrington look out that way. And when they're distracted, Jack flips their swords up, the key flies into the air, Jack fights off Will and Norrington, grabs the key, and starts running away. And then we go back to what's in the movie, where Norrington throws Will to the ground, throws the sand into his face, and says, "By your leave, Mr. Turner." And overall, I love that. I am a massive sword fighting junkie. I love sword fights. That's why, the blacksmith duel in Curse of Black Pearl is one of my favorite scenes from Pirates of the Caribbean. I love sword fighting. Pirates of the Caribbean made me love sword fighting and made me love swords in general. The beautiful art of sword fighting. And I love this scene because it's a whole extended part of the sword fight we don't see in the movie. There's some great zoomed out shots of the location of the exumas they're shooting on, which I just would have loved to see this in the movie. I love also the certified Jack Sparrow moment, as I call them, where Jack just looks out in the distance, squints, and distracts Will and Norrington to get what he needs. A typical Jack Sparrow move. But yeah, overall, I would have loved to see that in the movie. I love sword fights, so just give me all the extended sword fights. And that brings us to the very last Dead Man's Chest deleted scene, which is also one of the best Pirates of the Caribbean deleted scenes of all time. And this one's called The Map is Finished. And this one takes place at the end of the movie, when Norrington delivers the heart to Cutler Beckett. So Norrington walks over to Beckett's desk, just like in the movie, and Beckett says, "If you intend to claim these, then you must have something to trade. Do you have the compass?" And then Norrington shakes his head and says, "Better." And then, just like in the movie, he drops the heart onto Beckett's desk, and he says, "The heart of Davy Jones." And then we get footage for the rest of the scene that is not in the movie, where Beckett actually opens up the sack that the heart is in and actually takes a look at it. And he actually sees the heart for the first time. And actually he knows now that it's real. And Beckett says, "It's remarkable." And then Norrington says, "I take it I've won commission as a privateer." And Beckett looks back up at him and smiles and says, "Oh, I think better." And right next to his desk is none other than James Norrington's sword from the first movie that he got when he was promoted to Commodore. Of course, the sword that Will made for Norrington. Beckett flips open the case, and Norrington sees the sword again. And Beckett says, "Reinstatement to your former rank and status, all rights and privileges attendant." And Beckett continues and says, "And I think a promotion is due as well. Do you agree, Admiral Norrington?" And at the same moment, Norrington pulls the sword out of its sheath, and we get this shot of Norrington looking at the blade of the sword, and you can literally see like tears welling up in Norrington's eyes as he looks at this sword again. Like, this is what I mean by all the good Norrington scenes being cut from the movie. Like, you cannot tell me this shot right here of Norrington literally crying seeing the sword again shouldn't have been in the movie. This should have been in the movie. This whole scene should have been in the movie. It's so good. Jack Davenport, once again, you are such a good actor. But right after this, Norrington actually aims his sword at the heart and says, "Give the order, sir." And then Beckett says, No. That would be terribly imprudent." And he continues and says, "Where's the profit in killing Jones when instead we can add another ship to your fleet?" And at this moment, Beckett opens the doors to outside and he sees the Flying Dutchman has just surfaced in the harbor of Port Royal. So Mercer and Norrington join Beckett on the balcony, and Beckett says, "Whoever controls the heart of Davy Jones controls the sea." And then we get a really cool shot of the Flying Dutchman and Davy Jones actually taking his hat off for the first and only time ever, besides the hat flying off when he dies, but that doesn't count. He literally takes his hat off to actually salute. And right after that, we get one of my favorite Beckett moments, actually probably my favorite Beckett moment in all of Pirates of the Caribbean. The guy who has been painting the map the entire movie, by the way, literally the unsung hero of this movie. He's been painting this whole map the entire movie. He goes up to Beckett and says, "The map is finished, sir." And Beckett turns around and looks at the map. He walks back in and takes a good look at it. And all he says is this: "Just the way I imagined it." And that is the end of the final deleted scene for Dead Man's Chest. The ending of that scene is literally, it gives me chills every single time Beckett says that line. Every time he walks up to the map and says, "Just how I imagined it," literally goosebumps every single time. Like, because this is a guy who literally wants to pretty much control the world. That's the whole point. That's why he went after the Dead Man's Chest, so he can control Davy Jones, therefore controlling the sea, therefore pretty much controlling the world, honestly. And now seeing a map of the entire world being finished, you know, he's like, "Just how I imagined it." And like, this also goes back to At World's End a little bit, where, you know, in that scene with Jack and Barbossa at the Kraken's corpse, you know, where Jack says, you know, "The world's still the same, there's just less in it." And that also kind of goes back to this, with the map actually being finished, and the myth, you know, the myth of the sea, you know, the legends and all this stuff has been pretty much, you know, doused and gone, because the map of the world has been finished. Uncharted waters are no longer uncharted. They're charted now, you know, which it really just, it's a good precursor to showing kind of the end game feel of At World's End. And also, of course, I forgot to mention, this is actually when Norrington actually gets his promotion to Admiral. So, of course, in At World's End, we see that Norrington is Admiral Norrington, and this is actually when we get to see him being promoted to that. But once again, one of my favorite deleted scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean. There are so many great moments in this. Also, Norrington literally crying when he sees the sword again. How can you tell me that shouldn't be in the movie? Jack Davenport, Norrington, you deserved better. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode of Podcast of the Caribbean. I hope you've enjoyed all of these amazing deleted scenes from Dead Man's Chest. So by the time this episode releases, the week after this episode releases, I should say, we are going to be releasing a very special 20th anniversary celebration of the Curse of the Black Pearl episode. I've been talking about this for a few months now, but that'll be coming out a week after this episode airs. So whenever this episode actually comes out. But that'll be really cool. That'll be a week after this episode. And then the week after the Curse of the Black Pearl special, we'll be going back to our regular schedule with the At World's End deleted scenes the week after. So hope you're ready for the At World's End deleted scenes. And I hope you're ready to learn so much about the Curse of the Black Pearl. Of course, I did 4 episodes on Curse of the Black Pearl at the very beginning of this podcast. But I didn't go into the production. I didn't go into how the movie actually got made. And that's what we're going to be talking about on that episode. So I hope you're all excited and ready to listen to that, because I am really excited. There's a lot of work going into this one, a lot of research. And yeah, I'm really excited for you guys to listen to that one and actually get to hear it. And I hope you will all enjoy it, just as I hope you all enjoyed this episode. So once again, thank you so much for listening. If you've left a rating or a review on the podcast on any of the platforms, I thank you so much. It means the world to me that people love this podcast and actually enjoy listening to it and just immersing ourselves in Pirates of the Caribbean 20 years after the first movie. So thank you so much. I'll see you next time for our Curse of the Black Pearl 20th anniversary special bonus episode. But until then, thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or question, send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Twitter at podcastpotc and over on Instagram at Podcast of the Caribbean. I post fun content, trivia, and other stuff over there. Make sure you go and check it out. But be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.